In this video, we'll be taking a look at episode 8 of season 2 of Severance. This episode has received the show's lowest ever user rating on IMDb. Its rating of 6.7 out of 10 is significantly lower than the other episodes this season, with no others being lower than 8.2, and the previous episode being as high as 9.4. In this video, we'll go over why many people hate this episode, and put forward some arguments about why it's actually not that bad. I think a lot of the hate has been because people are itching to see more of the stories that have been set up for this season. Focusing purely on Cobel in this episode means you're waiting an extra week to find out more from the regular characters. While Cobel is a key player in the series, and played by a big-name actor, you could easily argue that all 4 MDR team members, Milchick, and maybe now Gemma, are more central to the story. So dedicating a whole episode to the origins of the show's 7th most important character may be asking a lot of viewers' patience. When I think about what makes Severance great, it's mostly to do with the events on the Severed Floor, and how the members of the MDR team struggle with the company and their own relationships. So taking us away from that environment and putting us in a completely different, quite desolate location means it's not quite what we were expecting. I've also seen some people say the episode is slow-paced and nothing much happens. Even though the runtime of the episode is only 37 minutes, I think it's fair to say that this episode doesn't exactly fly by. There are lots of lingering shots in between scenes, and a lot of the drama is in the things that the characters don't say as much as what they do. The scene in Hampton's coffee shop is a good example of this, as we see Hampton go from a warm and convivial host to his regular customers to giving Cobel a frosty reception, but the dialogue in the scene is incredibly sparse, and most of the drama in the scene comes from the uncomfortable silences. We know that Hampton and Cobel have a shared past, which involved them both being child labourers for Lumon, but these details, in the style of Severance, are only revealed in a few throwaway lines, and we don't get any depth or detail about what Harmony Cobel's life was like in the place where she was a child. Whether you think this sparse kind of storytelling is enough information to be satisfied is a matter of opinion, I suppose. Personally, I quite like the puzzle of piecing together a larger picture from the scraps of information that we've had, but that's not for everyone. You could also describe this episode as being pretty bleak. In fairness, Salt's Neck doesn't look like the kind of place many people would want to live, but there was something oddly beautiful about the location, even if it was a formerly thriving place that slid into a terminal decline. A company town where the company has left town is bound to be like that. It's both tragic and ironic that the remaining inhabitants of the town all seem to be hooked on ether, a product made by the company that used to employ most of the town. So Salt's Neck and its inhabitants all seem pretty depressing, and not nearly as much fun as watching Mark, Helly and the gang roam the corridors of the Severed Floor. But we did get glimpses of some interesting stories at Salt's Neck, and it expanded the story world of Severance by letting us know another way that Lumon has ruined people's lives. A more technical criticism of the episode could be made about the way Cobel's character has been fleshed out, and the big revelation about her basically inventing Severance. While there was no huge surprise that Cobel's auntie is emotionally closed off and a bit crazy, because that's how you end up with a character like Cobel. However, I've seen comments online about how some people found it a stretch to believe Cobel invented Severance. There are 3 reasons why I don't think it's crazy that she thought up and planned the chip. Firstly, she worked in an ether factory from age 8, so it's pretty understandable that this kind of experience would lead you to dreaming up an invention that helps you forget how awful your work life is. Secondly, we saw her remove Petey's chip from his brain during his wake. At the time, I wondered how she had the skills to extract the chip so quickly. If she's the one that invented the process and the chip, then this scene makes a lot more sense. And lastly, we saw proof in this episode that she was a child prodigy in the eyes of Lumon, and was handpicked by Jamie Egan because of her potential. So her being brilliant enough to create Severance, and Jamie Egan taking the credit for it, sounds realistic to me. I've also seen a few people complain that the episode could have easily been trimmed down to fit inside a regular episode of Severance, rather than giving it its own dedicated episode. I can understand this thinking, as you could trim out a lot of the lovely scene setting and Salt's End world building stuff, and then have 15 minutes of Cobel reconnecting with the past. But the same could be said for Gemma's story in the last episode. I think both these stories are improved by this more focused storytelling approach. Now let's look at the positives from this episode. I think the biggest reason to like this episode is because in its own meandering fashion, we learned a lot about the history of Lumon, the invention of Severance, and Cobel's personal backstory. This additional information helps us to make more sense of why Cobel is a danger to Lumon, and makes it more logical that she would want to help Mark. Ragabi abandoning Mark partway through his reintegration process was effectively a death sentence for him. But now Cobel seems to be teaming up with him, he's got a powerful and knowledgeable ally. While it's probably correct not to entirely trust Cobel, the events of this episode at least give a plausible reason for her to switch sides, even though her true intentions might be harder to know. I'd also argue if you set aside your expectations for what you want to see in an episode of Severance, this was still a decent piece of television. The acting is excellent, the direction's beautiful in places, and the story works both in its own right and as a way of deepening the audience's understanding of the whole Severance universe. Going to Salt's Neck gave us another example of how uncaring and cruel Lumon can be. They pulled out of the town and pretty much left the residents and former employees to rot. Just a few shots of the town and the short scene in the coffee shop created a big impression, even if it was hard to watch at times. Finding out about Cobel inventing Severance wasn't the only important new information revealed in this episode. We also found out more about the Wintertide Scholarship, which Miss Wong is apparently hoping to receive if Milchick signs her off. It also helps us to understand how crushing Cobel's firing by Lumon was to her, It wasn't just a job, it had been her life since she was 8 years old, and she was raised in a town that was literally built by the company. It's closer to being thrown out of a cult than losing a job, so Cobel's more unhinged moments, like when she nearly ran Mark over, make more sense when you know more about her backstory. As for whether this episode is boring or not, personally I didn't think it was boring. The energy in this episode is a bit sadder, and the drama is more subtle, but I was never bored in any of the scenes. There were a few factors that didn't help this episode. Firstly, it comes straight after another episode that wasn't set on the severed floor, and it was the 4th episode out of the 8 we've had so far, where we spent virtually no time in the workplace that is technically the focus of this show. The 2nd episode was set entirely in the outie world. The Otbo episode was obviously all outside rather than in the office. And the Gemma episode was told in flashbacks to Mark and Gemma's relationship, alongside giving us an insight onto Gemma's life on the testing floor. Gemma even tried to get onto the severed floor, but was quickly turned back by Milchick. So I think fans are thirsty for scenes of the MDR team refining data and trying to burn Lumon to the ground. All these episodes away from the show's main location have been good in my eyes, but I think the number of them may affect the balance of Season 2. Though there are still 2 episodes to go at the time of making this video, it's possible that we'll see all the loose ends that are being created neatly tied up by the end of the season, and these diversions will hopefully make more sense once the complete story of the season is told. I don't think this episode would have had the backlash it received if Apple TV dropped the whole season of Severance in one go. Because of the weekly release schedule, each episode is eagerly awaited and pulled to bits every week. If you could just shrug your shoulders and go straight to watching the next episode, then there wouldn't be the depth of feeling that's been generated by this episode. Some of the negativity around the episode is due to the incredibly high bar that's been set by all the other Severance episodes up to now. Maintaining such a consistent quality level is hard to sustain, and I can't think of many of the best series that don't have the occasional misstep. So I'm not even sure you could call this episode a misstep, even if it's clear it's not landed as well as the other episodes have with some people. The nearest equivalent to this episode I can think of will be the Fly episode of Breaking Bad, which was a bottle episode set in a meth lab with Walt and Jesse. Some highly praised this episode for its high quality writing and acting, but others were impressed by an episode set entirely in just one location. The final point I'd like to make is about fan culture in general, rather than this particular episode. My feeling is that many people struggle to accept that other people can think something different to them, and would rather squabble online than live with the possibility that other people don't like something that you've enjoyed, or vice versa. While Miss Case would no doubt encourage us to enjoy each episode equally, I think it's probably best to accept that we all have different opinions, and someone thinking differently to us doesn't impact our enjoyment of something. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And before you go, why don't you tell me what you thought of this episode? Did you love it? Hate it? Somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments. Goodbye.